Hello and welcome to the universe where Graggle Simpson exists. And happy Pride Month! I was looking for a big topic to cover for hitting 1,000 subscribers. And I've wanted to talk about The Simpsons forever. And everything fell into place, the stars aligned, and the aurora borealis lit up my kitchen. What I'm about to talk about might surprise some of you. Some people out there don't remember Graggle Simpson. In their version of reality, the older Simpsons episode only had 5 members in the family: Marge, Homer, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. They didn't have Graggle. It's like the iconic scenes that Graggle made are just blocked in their mind. Now, I know what you're thinking. Graggle? Don't you mean Gumbly? And I know Graggle's not technically their real name, but Baby Yoda's not really called Baby Yoda. When people name you Graggle, you're Graggle now. I think my favourite Graggle moment is where they discover that their middle name is J. Hey, how many people have I lost so far? It's hard to keep this up. It's all a hoax, folks. I guess we've collectively arrived at a sense of humour where we all invent Mandela effects. Mandalism? There are many people on the internet claiming that Graggle, also known as Gumbly, is a real character on The Simpsons. They are photoshopping Graggle into images, editing them into scenes, and even programming them into games. The dedication to this hoax is strong, and I want to know why. I cannot describe to you how fascinating I find it that human beings are just inventing characters and pretending that they were real. Sometimes I like to think of myself as an alien observing human behaviour, and this is one of the fun moments. Just like when we started to say "o'clock" to tell the time because it wasn't the sun, it was from the clock. Aww. So cute. And this Graggle thing, it tickles me. So this is also kind of an excuse for me to talk Simpsons, which I promise will be fun. I was a Simpsons mania kid, and as an adult, I took a course called The Simpsons Introduce Philosophy. So I think I know a thing or two about fun. The Simpsons and me go way back. In fact, The Simpsons has always existed in my timeline. For all I know, when The Simpsons stops existing, maybe I'll stop existing? Anyway, this show is that alien observation at times. In its heyday, it held a warped yellow mirror. Up to society, challenging us all to acknowledge the absurdity of the system we all operate in, overblowing the average human experience into extremes for humour, and taking jokes so far they became outrageous, indulgent, and unexpected. I often attribute my own sense of humour and conversational direction to The Simpsons. If there's an offbeat, silly thought that comes to mind, that's where we're going to go. My all-time favourite episode is, of course, Season 7's 22 short films about Springfield, for the absolute masterpiece that is Steamed Hams. Steamed Hams takes a typical 20th century worker-boss dynamic that's been building up for 6 seasons and blows it up to the extreme. What if you lied beyond all reasonable belief? I find that inspiring. Aware that not many shows have a life beyond a 7th or 8th season, the showrunners and writers began to get quite experimental, and rather than satirise and parody the real world, they began to satirise and parody The Simpsons. The much beloved episode, Season 8's Homer's Enemy, is, as one of my favourite Simpsons podcasts, Flynn Springfield, puts it, in conversation with itself. It made us realise that if Homer was real, we would all hate that guy. He actually embodies a lot of the things young people revere about older generations to this day. Great job despite having no qualifications, managed to get on the property ladder when houses were dirt cheap, is beloved by everyone despite being lazy and not putting in the effort. The show was saying, should we like this guy? Is he not the problem? Or do you not really care? For some people, this was a turning point in the Simpsons conversation, but for many, the edge of the abyss was Season 9's The Principal and the Pauper. In this episode, it's revealed that Principal Skinner is an imposter who took the place of the real Seymour Skinner after the Vietnam War. This was another moment where the Simpsons sort of broke the illusion of Springfield. Skinner, as I touched on earlier, had a specific dynamic with the rest of the town. He's painted as someone who grew up under strict authority and carried that characterisation into adulthood, becoming a school principal, trying desperately to gain some control, but still ultimately fearful of the authority of his mother and his superior, Super Nintendo Chalmers. And the principal in the popper was like, well, not really. That's not really his backstory. He's actually an imposter, and the real Skinner is not a caricature and not as endearing. The town of Springfield decides they don't want the real Skinner, and they reinstate the Skinner we know and love as the original Skinner. It's kind of a nod to how sitcoms return to the status quo at the end of each episode, so freely and yet absurdly. Surely life has changed forever after you've been to space, fought a former president, or been conned into building a deadly citywide monorail. But The Simpsons and many other shows do this return to form at the end of every episode, with a few exceptions. So the principal and the popper sort of called out this standard, and that's really interesting to me. The Simpsons don't age, which gave the show a timelessness that was reliable. We could always expect the characters to behave like the characters. But it meant that the characters didn't develop all that much. Now, don't get me wrong, Season 1 Homer and Season 8 Homer are completely different people. But that's largely because Homer's character was refined into the oafish everyman who reactionally tries to do the best for his family. But he never really learned anything from his experiences. So if in one episode he learned that he shouldn't be selfish and put his family first, by the next episode he'd forgotten that. But that's not to say that he didn't have a lot of heart, because by refining Homer, he became more and more endearing. It's just that that could only be sustained for so long. Culture is a pendulum that swings from extreme to extreme. This period of The Simpsons was cynical and countercultural, and it fitted the early 90s like a glove. It parodied and satirised pop culture. But by the noughties, The Simpsons was struggling to challenge culture because the culture it was challenging was gone. And The Simpsons was now so mainstream that it was part of popular culture. I remember when I was a teenager, The Simpsons decided to parody the TV show 24. 24 is a TV show about a guy who does spy things within 24 hours. I had actually never watched it, but it was like really big at the time. One of my friends was really into 24 and we were all really into The Simpsons, and so we decided that we were going to get together to watch this episode. And I didn't really want to talk about it at the time, and I don't think my friends did either, but it was rubbish. I was finding The Simpsons boring at this point. Nobody laughed when we watched the show together, and I think we all kind of felt like it was definitely past its prime. And part of that could be chalked up to the fact that I was a teenager well into my emo phase, but I did enjoy stuff. I still found things hilariously funny, and The Simpsons just wasn't doing that. So this came out in 2007, which was the same year as The Simpsons movie was released, and it was huge. I remember also feeling conflicted at that point, and I came away from the Simpsons movie just feeling like, okay, I've seen it. It didn't have the magic of early Simpsons for me, and I didn't find it super clever, and it also contributed a joke to pop culture that took such a long time to die. It was a natural moment in time for me to bush. And loads of other people felt the same. Many people refer to post-season 12 Simpsons as zombie Simpsons. Lifeless, soulless, heartless. Unfortunately, I did see further episodes of The Simpsons, and there is one in particular that for me exemplifies the abandonment of original Simpsons. It came out in 2008, but for some reason I didn't watch it then. I watched it much later. I don't really know how, but I managed to catch this episode somewhere. Where were you when you saw that 90s show? The first sin of this episode is that it borrows the naming format from That 70s Show, another TV show that I loved in my childhood, so thanks for taking a dump on that. In the episode, Homer and Marge recount a part of their relationship where Marge has an affair with a pretentious history professor, and a dejected, self-destructive Homer achieves brief fame as the frontman of a grunge band, parodying Nirvana. What bugs me most about this episode is that it tells us that Homer and Marge were dating pre-marriage and pre-kids in the 90s. But fans of The Simpsons and people alive in the 90s know that The Simpsons were a family in the 90s. Homer and Marge dated in the 70s and started a family in the 80s. The Simpsons can't really parody the 90s because The Simpsons was a quintessential staple of the 90s. I was also a really big Nirvana fan in my teens, so it was painful to me that they dragged the band into this monstrosity. Of course, the out-of-touchness of The Simpsons was raised when the conversation around its over-stereotyping of cultures came under fire in the past decade. And they didn't deal with it well. I haven't fully committed to watching another episode of New Simpsons since I saw that 90s show. But I engage with The Simpsons all the time. The Simpsons lives on in memes and in fan art. The original show was still very relatable and comforting. The remixes of Steamed Hams is a delight, and Simpsons Wave is wonderful. And that's why Graggle has tickled me so much. So I did some research on Graggle and it's a little bit hazy, but this is some information that I managed to gather from articles. On January 29th, 2021, an anonymous 4chan user posted the earliest known variant of the character Gumbly. They wrote that the Simpsons creator Matt Groening created the character because he wanted to insert himself into the series. Now, if you're a Simpsons fan, then you already know that Matt Groening based the characters off his own family and thus is portrayed already through Bart. But anyway, the user wrote, "Believe it or not, that is how Matt Groening sees himself. He wanted Gumbly to be good friends with Bart and replace Milhouse. The writers in the studio were concerned about how this would alter the show and the design was too creepy. Matt Groening is very embarrassed about this character. If you ever see him, do not bring up Weird Matt or Yellow Matt." I mean, if I ever personally meet Matt Groening, I'd have thousands of questions because I'm also a massive Futurama fan. But Gumbly/Graggle might come up. In 2021, people started running with a joke that Gumbly was a real character, and if you didn't remember him being in the show, it was a Mandela effect where your memory was playing tricks on you. Somewhere along the way, the character was also called Graggle, and now we're kind of running with both names. The funny thing is that although not in an official episode of The Simpsons, yet, Graggle/Gumbly is real. We've made him real. We live in an age where we can create realities, and although a hoax, Graggle/Gumbly now exists. And why would we do that? Because there's something counterculture about it. There's something Simpsons about it. There's something Steamed Hams about it. It's an overblown lie, but it's fun. It's absurd, and it's taken to the extreme. It's an ode to old Simpsons in the same way that fan art, remixes, and memes are. And to me, that's beautiful. So there we go, I finally made a tribute to The Simpsons. I know I may have complained a lot during it, but that's what fans do. Tell me your favourite Simpsons moment in the comments and let me know what you think about Graggle, and I'll see you next time.